Hello, welcome to Talking the Secret Doctrine. My name is Dr. Don Franklin Shepherd, and today we will be continuing our study of the first volume of H.P. Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine, in particular on pages 426 to pages 430. Once again, we will be using H.P. Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine, published by Theosophical University Press, located out at Pasadena, California. The passage that I want to start with today is on page 426 in the third paragraph. And let us go ahead and see how H.P. Blavatsky continues the theme of the threefold logoi and the sevenfold mundane egg on these pages. This is what she writes. The first, or rather one, principle was called the circle of heaven, symbolized by the hierogram of a point within a circle or equilateral triangle, the point being the logos. So here we have the immaculate disc as the first logos. We have the point within the immaculate disc as the third logos, sometimes referenced to as the second logos. And this immaculate disc can also be represented as an equilateral triangle because it is the threefold great breath, the first logos, the second logos, and the third logos. She continues, in the Rig Veda, therefore, wherein Brahma is not even named, Brahma here being the third logos, cosmogony is preluded with the Hiranyagarbha, the golden egg. So here the golden egg is that central point as the third logos, which ultimately becomes the golden egg of the seventh layer of the mundane egg, because it surrounds it. And Prajapti, Brahma later on, so here Prajapti can be many things, but she specifically labels Prajapti as the third logos here, from whom emanate all the hierarchies of creators. And those creators, of course, are the creators in the mundane egg, which are usually referred to as Dhyani Chohans in the Secret Doctrine. She continues, the monad, or point, so here we're dealing with the monad, the third logos, is the original and is the unit from which follows the entire numeral system. So we have a tenfold system here. This point, this third logos, is the first cause, but that from which it emanates, or of which rather it is the expression, the logos, is passed over in silence. And that is because diving into the immaculate disc is something very different than seeing the central point in one's inner vision. She continues, in its turn, the universal symbol, the point within the circle, was not yet the architect, but the cause of that architect. That's because the architect here we're going to go ahead and consider as the seventh layer of the mundane egg, Oyahu. And the latter stood to it in precisely the same relation as the point itself stood to the circumference of the circle. So the latter is the architect, stood to it, that is the third logos, in precisely the same relation as the point itself stood to the circumference of the circle. So this theme has been dealt with before. We have three lights. We have the light of the immaculate disc, we have the light of the third logos, and we have the light of the seventh layer of the mundane egg, which really surrounds it. And so it's actually this Hiranyagarbha also. 3 points in a certain sense. And she goes on. And so the point itself stood to the circumference of the circle, which cannot be defined, according to Hermes Trismegistus. Porphyry shows that the monad, we already know that's the third logos, and the duad of Pythagoras are identical with Plato's infinite and finite and Philebus, or what Plato calls so forth and so on. It is the latter only which is substantial. So here we're dealing with the duad as Mula Prakriti, evolving into Prakriti and ultimately evolving into the various layers of the mundane egg, whether we call that Sophia or Sophia Akamoth or Akamoth. The former being the cause of all unity and measure of all things. She goes on, the duad, here she's referring to it as Mula Prakriti, the veil being thus shown to be the mother of the logos and at the same time his daughter, the object of his perception, the produced producer, and the secondary causes of it. Now, to understand that passage, I want to again remind the listener that H.P. Blavatsky often conflates the second and the third logos. The second logos being space, and the third logos being that central point. But in a certain way, it's the third logos that produces the second logos, because only when the third logos comes out of the belly, the underbelly of the second logos, is the second logos seen. And therefore the second logos, Mula Prakriti, is both the mother and also the daughter. I think for this, I wanted to bring up a 6th century Buddhist philosopher, one of my favorites, Dignaga, in a small text entitled Investigation of the Percept. A percept is an image that is retained by the senses, such as when one is looking through their inner vision. But it's one of my favorite texts, and I think that the very end of this text by Dignaga explains this relationship of the second logos to the third logos and how they can be conflated. And in fact, throughout the Secret Doctrine, explains the theme of how the Father can be the father and yet at the same time be the son of the female principle. So in the Investigation of the Percept, this is what Dignaga writes, and here we are dealing with the very end, in this case in phrasing number 6. 5 and 6 actually, going down to phrasing 8. And this is what he writes. But an internal cognitive object, in this case space, which appears as though external, in this case space, is the object. So space is an object, whether internally or whether externally. Why? Because it is cognition itself. So space is cognition itself. Now remember, earlier we mentioned Mula Prakriti as being bare subjectivity. That is, it is uncovered, meaning the light is not shining yet, subjectivity, which means it has cognition, it's conscious. So space is cognition itself. Barely, but it's cognition. And because it is its condition, so cognition is the condition of space. And it's a condition of space whether space itself possesses it or whether space produces cognition and that cognition sees it and reflects on it. For example, the second logos, Mula Prakriti, produces from itself as cognition a secondary cognition. The secondary cognition is the third logos. The third logos then starts moving away from its source of the darkness of space. As it moves away, it returns its vision, which means that it's reflecting on its source, and in turning its vision back to space, it itself possesses a speck of that bare subjectivity. Dignaga continues. Even though they are simultaneous, meaning that we're going to have the cognition of the second logos and we're going to have the cognition of the third logos, it is its condition because it is invariably concomitant. They have to be conflated. They exist at the same time. It is sequential because of a transfer of capacity. The third logos is time. It brings in time. It's sequential. The second logos is not. This transfer of capacity means that the second logos is cognition, and as the third logos moves through it in the darkness and breaks out into the light, that capacity is transferred to the third logos in a different way. It's the divine thought being transferred from the first logos to the second logos to the third logos, and then tincturing the sevenfold mundane egg, tincturing Oyahu, so that Oyahu can carry with him the universal thought, and he thereby becomes the architect. It is sequential because of transfer of capacity. A sense faculty is a cooperating sense capacity. So our sense faculties can form an image of sense capacities, which are the second and the third logos. We possess those faculties. It is not contradictory for this capacity also to be in cognition. So we have bare subjectivity of the second logos also being in cognition that perceives it back. So the second logos is the mother. It's also the daughter because the third logos is viewing it, and the third logos is going to view it differently than the mother actually is. A child can never see its parent for what the parent actually is. Thus, the object in this case, the second logos, and the capacity, meaning cognition, cause one another and have done so from beginningless time. So now we know why the second and the third logos are conflated in H.P. Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine. These are beautiful ideas that H.P. Blavatsky has. Fantastic ideas on 426 and 427. Let's go ahead and turn the page down to page 428. Down there at bottom, she is talking about the logos, she's talking about space, and she's talking about light. Let's see what she says. This is the next to last paragraph. And the lecturer explains what he means by this acting of something which is nothing, though it is the all, by a fine simile. He compares the logos to the sun, through which light and heat radiate, but whose energy, light, and heat exist in some unknown condition in space, and are diffused in space only as visible light and heat, the sun being only the agent thereof. This is the first triadic hypostasis. Well, she's referring to energy, light, and heat as the triadic hypostasis, but then she goes on to reveal the real meaning. The quaternary is made up by the energizing light shed by the logos. So here we're dealing with the quaternary of the seventh layer, the sixth layer, the fifth layer, and the fourth layer of the mundane egg. And this energizing light is in fact Divi Prakriti, up at the seventh layer of the mundane egg. However, because that energy light is descending down to the solar suns, Divi Prakriti can also be referred to as the solar suns, as the light of the solar suns. But it's all of this light that's dropping from the seventh layer of the mundane egg to the fourth layer of the mundane egg. And this is the mystical connection between them. Divi Prakriti is the mystical connection between the seventh and the fourth layers of the mundane egg. She goes on to talk about Kabbalism. And she writes in that last paragraph on page 428, the Hebrew Kabbalists give it a shape which esoterically is identical with the Vedantic. En Sof, they taught, the first logos, could not be comprehended, could not be located nor named, though the causeless cause of all. So here we're dealing with the idea of diving into the immaculate white disk, diving into that vast expanse of whiteness. How can it be located? How can it be named? It can't be named because there's nothing else that's possible for perception. She goes on. Hence its name, En Sof, is a term of negation, the inscrutable, the incognizable, and the unnameable. So this bright white light is negation. And that's why she refers it as darkness. She continues. They made of it, therefore, a boundless circle, a sphere of which human intellect, with the utmost stretch, could only perceive the vault. So we are able to perceive En Sof. So often theosophists argue, based on some earlier passages in the Secret Doctrine, that cannot be perceived. Here, it can be perceived by the intellect. In the words of one who has unriddled much of it in the Kabbalistic system, in one of its meanings thoroughly, in its numerical and geometrical esotericism. And this is a really key passage here that I want to read to you on page 429. Close your eyes, and from your own consciousness of perception, try and think outward to the extremest limits in every direction. You will find that equal lines or rays of perception extend out evenly in all directions, so that the utmost effort of perception will terminate in the vault of a sphere. The limitation of the sphere will of necessity be a great circle, and the direct rays of thought in any and every direction must be right line radii of the circle. This, then, must be, humanly speaking, the extremist all-embracing conception of the En Sof manifest, which formulates itself as a geometrical figure of a circle with its elements of curved circumference and right line diameter divided into radii. Hence, a geometrical shape is the first recognizable means of connection between the En Sof and the intelligence of man. Well, this is a very different view than the view that is often recorded that Blavatsky holds, that there's no way to speculate on this, there's no way to envision it. In fact, all of these things are taking place as a stream of consciousness in the human mind. Now she goes on, and I want to continue here on paragraph number 2 on page 429, and she writes, This great circle, which Eastern esotericism reduces the point within the boundless circle, is the Avalokiteshvara, the logos or variable, of which Mr. Subaru speaks. Actually, Avalokiteshvara, as the seventh layer of the mundane egg, would be the point of the point in the Immaculate Disc, but who's counting points? And so we have Avalokiteshvara interchangeably being referred to as the third logos, or the seventh layer of the mundane egg. And she goes on, but this circle, or manifested God, is as unknown to us, except through its manifested universe as the one, though easier, or rather more possible to our highest conceptions. That is, it is much easier to envision Paramatman, Oyahu, the architect, the seventh layer of the mundane egg, than it is to be able to envision the central point, or to be able to envision and dive into the Immaculate Disc. So she's showing that there's different layers that we are able to conceive of in our inner stream of consciousness. She goes down finally to the very bottom because she wants to draw a correlation between Avalokiteshvara as one of the gods in the Asian religions to the various gods in other religious traditions. She wants to draw a correspondence. She works by analogy continually through the secret doctrine. And down there at the bottom of the page, this is what she writes. The reflections or multiplied aspects of that logos, or Avalokiteshvara, Brahma, Ormaz, Osiris, Adam Kadmon, call it by any of these names, which aspects or manvantaric emanations are the Dhyan Chohans, the Elohim, the Devas, and the Amshaspens. Finally, she closes this idea that she's been presenting on page 430. And here she once again, she returns to the concept of light. And at the very top of the page on 430, she's introducing that concept of light again through the logo. Here's what she writes. So she talks about this highest trinity that we are capable of understanding, which is Mula Prakriti, the veil. So the second logos, that's interesting. We're capable of understanding Mula Prakriti. The logos, here the logos is going to be the third logos, the central point, and the conscious energy of the latter, or its power and light. So this is Daiva Prakriti. So here she has Mula Prakriti, the second logos. She has the logos as the central point, the third logos. And she has Daiva Prakriti as the seventh layer of the mundane egg. And she continues, or matter, force, and the ego, or the one root of self, of which every other kind of self is but a manifestation or a reflection. It is then only in this light of consciousness, of mental and physical perception, that practical occultism can throw this into visibility by geometrical figures. And of course, a geometrical figure that Daiva Prakriti is working through are these points, or these circles. And this is then why, as it's dropping down, Daiva Prakriti is dropping down from the third logos, seventh layer of the mundane egg. It's so significant that Daiva Prakriti is working through that circle of the solar suns. These are really beautiful thoughts, the H. P. Blavatsky here. And I want to close with one more. In that second paragraph, she writes, it is through this light, Daiva Prakriti, that everything is created. Whether that Daiva Prakriti refers to the central sun, or that Daiva Prakriti refers to the solar suns. This root of mental self is also the root of physical self. For this light is the permutation in our manifested world of Mula Prakriti, called Aditi in the Vedas. In its third aspect, it becomes Vak. The third aspect, meaning Mula Prakriti is the second logos, evolving into the third logos. Vak, in this case, being the third logos, and Mula Prakriti evolving into Prakriti, married to Purusha, the daughter and the mother of the logos, as Isis is the daughter and the mother of Horus, who is Horus, and Mut, the daughter, wife, and mother of Amon in the Egyptian moon glyph. She goes on, the reader can take it from there. Absolutely stunning passages. I've been so happy to be able to share them with you today. Thank you, and have a good time. Bye now.